welcome to this very special episode of Explained by NewsX. Xi Jinping has recently lauded the Panchsheel Agreement that was signed between India and China during Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru's time. We'll be taking a deep dive into the agreement and its ultimate fate. Now here's a glimpse of Pandit Nehru and his Chinese counterpart Zhou and Enlai in one of the many photos from the 1950s. In an effort to navigate through the equivocacy, the two leaders often met in the decade to forge a path for harmonious coexistence of the two prominent Asian nations. A fundamentally integral part of that vision was the Panchsheel, or 5 Principles of Peaceful Coexistence. However, even as its creation was underway, plans for its end were already forming. On 29 April 1954, Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru and Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai signed the Panchsheel Declaration in Peking, which is modern-day Beijing. While India and China signed this bilateral agreement to advance their national interests, it soon matured into a broader peace initiative. Notably, the Panchsheel Declaration merely served as an introduction to a larger trade treaty, the Agreement on Trade and Intercourse between the Tibet region of China and India. The 5 principles drafted and later clubbed as a part of Panchsheel include 1. Mutual respect for each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty. 2. Mutual non-aggression. 3. Mutual non-interference. 4. Equality and mutual benefit. And 5. Peaceful coexistence, as all written here. While the implementation of the declaration was largely overlooked by China, the idea behind its principles was endorsed and adopted at the Bandung Conference of Afro-Asian Nations organized by Indonesia in 1955, thereby expanding its footprint. In fact, in 1961, the Conference of Non-Alignment Nations in Belgrade accepted Panchsheel as the core principle of the non-alignment movement. Now, Panchsheel was built on Pandit Nehru's foreign policy of realism and idealism. But for China, it was a gateway to achieving its strategic objectives. China had already started striking its tentacles in 1950 by annexing Tibet. On 7 October 1950, Chinese troops advanced into Tibet. At the time, most Tibetans were unaware of the invasion. By March 25, 1959, Chinese government troops had absolute control of Lhasa, the capital of Tibet. Over 1.2 million Tibetans were killed by Chinese troops, and as many as 100,000 were forced to flee as refugees to India, Nepal, and Bhutan. This included spiritual leader the Dalai Lama. A fierce conflict was silently raging between the two nations. And it became blatant in October of 1962 when Chinese army attacked Indian forces on disputed territory and thus began the Sino-India War. In 4 weeks of fighting across high-altitude terrain, the better-resourced Chinese forces were eventually victorious. China announced a ceasefire on November 21st that year. But the Chinese military had captured 38,000 square kilometers of Aksai Chin region in Kashmir, which is an extension of the Tibetan plateau. As many as 1,690 Indians went missing. Over 400 were taken as prisoners of war. The war put an enormous strain on the Panchsheel Agreement. Pandit Nehru was taken aback. Fast forward to 15th June 2020, tensions along the line of actual control turned violent in nearly half a century. The Indian Army and Chinese People's Liberation Army engaged in deadly hand-to-hand combat in the Galwan Valley in Ladakh. The military standoff took place in Pangong So Galwan Valley and Daulat Beg Oldi in eastern Ladakh. The violent Galwan Valley clash resulted in the loss of 20 Indian Army soldiers from the 16th Bihar Regiment. 70 whole years after signing and breaching the Panchsheel Agreement, Chinese President Xi Jinping has issued an out-of-the-blue remark on the pact. He deemed it as a historical benchmark for international relations and international rule of law with regard to present-day conflicts. This comes after a meeting between the new Chinese ambassador to India, Chu Fei-hung, and CPIM and CPI leaders Sitaram Yechuri and D. Raja, respectively. Now, why is Xi Jinping going gaga over an agreement that was signed during the time of Pandit Nehru? Is it an attempt to attack Prime Minister Narendra Modi by praising Pandit Nehru, or an olive branch to India? Well, that is worth pondering for sure, but we will leave it up to your interpretation from here. Stay tuned for more such videos.